Hi everyone. I'm gonna share the slideshows. So I'm gonna be teaching a class on community safety and care, brought to you by Affirming Connections, who we just heard about. The focus of this class will be to learn how to not only protect yourself, but protect those around you if you end up marshaling or caring for other people in your community. These are sort of steps and methods that you can use. So a little about myself, we already went over it, but I've been working as a security guard for 5 years now in the Village, which is a historically queer space in Toronto. I'm the head of security at Buddies in Bad Times. I've marshaled pride, protests, food banks, marches of all sorts. And I've dealt with situations from people drinking too much to a stabbing. I had someone try to assault me last week. Also, when I talk about first aid and treatment, I've had about every injury you can think of. I've had my shoulders dislocated, I've had an arm broken, I've had a tooth broken out, I've had cuts to my face, I've had all sorts. So when I talk about first aid, I'm talking about it both from rendering the help and receiving the help. So the topics for today are there: emotional regulation, legality of first aid, legality of self-defense, first aid from cuts to CPR and seriousness,
I'm gonna go. Okay.
um, common drugs and the use of Narcan. Then we'll take a break and then we'll get into the more self-defense. So how to de-escalate situations, how to protect yourself. So some housekeeping. The majority of this training is for the 1% of times things go really wrong. You can use this every day in your life, but a lot of this is for worst case scenarios. The hands-on demonstration is for self-defense. If it stresses you out or upsets you in any way, feel free to step away. You can put your questions in the chat. I have about 8, 9 pages worth of information as well as the hands-on portion. So I'm going to be moving fairly quickly through content. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them, I promise. Um, this is a mix of legal and medical content as well as my own experiences. So not all of this is 100% what would be taught in a first aid class. This is more so things I've had to do hands-on that have taught me how to do this. Whoops. So I'm going to talk about the role of marshaling, just because it's a very important role and a common role for folks to take on after this class. Marshaling is a very vital and overlooked role in this community, especially in the queer community, but at large. You've likely already marshaled if you're someone interested in this class. If you're someone who at a dinner party has been the person to sort of step over and talk to someone who's had a little too much to drink or is getting aggravated in an argument, then you've done marshaling duties before. Marshals keep those who are celebrating safe and in good spirits. We're not there to ruin the festival, we're there to enhance it. Your role is to be the best friend, the safe person, the person people can turn to when they're in need or have a question and they don't feel safe enough to go to the authorities or someone more official. You're there to help out. Um, the main thing is if you're worried about marshaling, your role is to deal with lower level situations. As soon as you start to feel unsafe, you can step away from the situation and go and get help, but you're there to deal with lower situation issues. So someone who drank too much, someone who's lost, someone who needs someone to talk to. So just some common bad advice that I often hear that I'm going to get out of the way to start. Everyone is capable of first aid to a degree. You're able to do first aid no matter what. Whether you've had training or not, doing first aid can be as simple as staying next to the person and comforting them while you wait for paramedics to show up. So no matter what, you're able to do first aid. And when you're doing first aid, you can almost never make it worse. If you're doing first aid, the person is in distress and is already in a bad situation. So don't worry about making it worse. Worry about making the situation better. When it comes to self-defense, one of the worst things you can do is put your keys in your knuckles. I see people do that very often. That's a very easy way to break your own knuckles and to cut up your own hand. As well, for carrying weapons, do not carry mace, especially bear mace. Those are meant to be used from 5 to 20 feet away from you. So if you use those in a room or when someone's very close to you, you're just going to mace yourself as well as anyone else around you. So it's not a very helpful thing to have with you. If you ever see those self-defense weapon kits that are pop-out sticks, that are knuckles that look like unicorns, anything like that, those are almost never worth it. We'll teach you how to defend yourself with just your hands, and that is much more effective than any sort of cheap weapon you can buy online. And finally, when it comes to escalated situations where there might be violence, flight over fight every time. Your priority is always to escape the situation as safely as possible rather than cause harm or try to win a fight. So first thing is when you're being a marshal or first aider is to have self-awareness. We must be aware of our own biases and our own privileges, whether intentional or not. Every time we interact with the world, we always have a built-in group of assumptions of what we think the world is like, and we need to be aware of that. So any person we meet, we're going to have subconscious assumptions of. So we must keep aware and take into account that someone might have a non-visible disability. There might be a difference in class or in race, and that may affect the way that we walk into a situation, and we need to be aware of that. Especially as a marshal, and I've done this as a security guard a million times, taking a second before engaging with someone really allows you to understand the situation and what's actually happening rather than jumping to assumptions. And finally, when we're engaging with someone, we're always keeping in mind if it's in the best interest of everyone's and their safety. So is it in the best interest of the person you're interacting with to interact with that person? So is it for their safety and their interest that you're doing this action, or is it for everyone around them's safety and interest that you're doing this? So a few of the basics, two victims are always worse than one. So every time you go into a situation, you want to protect yourself first. You never want to become a victim to the situation as well. When we're going into situations, we're taking a breath, we're feeling our own bodies, and we're reminding ourselves that we're going into difficult situations, but we're doing it for our community. Anytime you have to be involved in a situation that might be escalated, where there might be first aid or there may be some physical altercation, taking a screenshot on your phone or noticing what time it is really helps in case you have to document the situation for later for either evidence or if the police become involved or any other situation, you can always let people know what time that happened because when it does happen, your sense of time is really going to change and you're not going to be able to know how much time has passed. When it comes to helping people, especially in first aid, you are legally allowed to say no. So if you ever feel unsafe or untrained to deal with a situation, you always have the ability to say no and just go and get help instead of dealing with that situation yourself. And most importantly, always trying to remember to slow your breathing, check for dangers, and do what you feel is best. You should always trust your gut when it comes to dangerous situations, but slowing your breathing lets you think a little more rationally about what's happening. So when we talk about slowing our breathing, the most useful way to slow your breath is called box breathing or 3x3 or military breathing. It's taught by most emergency services as well as militaries. It's been proven to slow your thoughts, make you more focused, make you less anxious. You don't need to be perfect at doing it. You just need to try to slow your breath. So I'm going to play a short video that's just going to show how to do it. Breathing in, hold for as long as you can, and breathing out again slowly, and then holding again. And just repeating that system is a great way to deal with thoughts when you're in a high pressure situation. So another grounding system you can use on top of breathing is a tap system. So tapping every finger to your thumb except for your ring finger or your middle finger This allows your brain to focus on something other than the situation that's happening. So your subconscious is going to focus on trying to make sure it's not touching the one finger that you chose not to touch. Another uh, technique you can use is progressive muscle relaxation. So tensing up one part of our body, so like our chest, tensing it up and then letting it go, and then tensing up our shoulders and letting it go. And this allows the anxiety and the adrenaline to run through your body in a more healthy way and allows you to get it out of your system. When you're doing the tense up progressive relaxation, it's important to not make a fist when you tense up your hands. So tense out your hands outwards rather than inwards. So we're going to talk about steps to do after an event, and then we'll get into the different events that can happen. So during events, your adrenaline's going to run high. That's going to make your body and your brain both feel out of sorts. It's going to make you feel shaky, and it's going to make it hard to process emotions and pain properly. And those are all going to come back afterwards. So you're going to start to feel any pain that you may have had from injuries and a lot of strong emotions from the upsetting situation you were just in. And when I talk about upsetting situations, it could be as simple as someone shouting or arguing with you, or it could be a medical emergency that you just dealt with. It's really any situation that sort of elevates your blood and gets you concerned. This can lead to distress, panic attacks, hyperventilation. This is why it's important to start our grounding techniques early on and start our breathing process early so that our body doesn't feel all these things all at once. After an event, letting a friend or a colleague know that you're okay, you're going to go take some time to yourself to reset. If you want to bring someone with you, bringing them with you and finding a calm place to collect yourself and sort of process what you just went through. When the event is done, again, if you didn't remember to before, screenshotting the time and documenting what happened if you're able to. So that can be a voice memo, you could write a note, anything that allows you to write down as much information as to the event as possible. This way, if emergency services gets involved or anyone else gets involved, you have a clear document of what's happened so that you can explain your own process of what happened. So now we're going to go on to some of the laws. I have laws that are federal, Ontario, and Alberta to go over. So this is the federal Good Samaritan Act. So all of Canada, you can call 911 with about an overdose without the threat of arrest for drug possession. When I talk about drug possession, that's simple drug possession. So as long as you don't have any more than a personal use amount of drugs, you can't get in trouble with the police when they show up to help give medical aid. I've personally dealt with multiple cases where folks are actively using the drugs while we're providing first aid, Narcan, to someone else nearby. The idea of this law is that we want to focus on keeping people alive and healthy rather than trying to punish people for using drugs. A little confusing, but there's a law by the same name in Ontario called the Good Samaritan Act, but this is for emergency first aid. So in Ontario, you can provide emergency first aid at the immediate scene of an accident with no liability for damages of neglect or failing to act. So if there's a car crash, if a telephone wire falls, and you immediately help a person in that area, you cannot be found legally responsible for the actions you take. You cannot expect compensation for your assistance. I'm not sure who would be asking for cash while you're giving CPR or first aid to someone, but please don't do that. Um, you are only liable for gross negligence according to the average person's knowledge. So if us as a group thought that something that one of us did was grossly negligent, then you could be in trouble. The only case I've ever heard of where this has happened is someone tried to use a car battery to shock someone back to life when the person was somewhat responsive in Northern Ontario. And that was seen as grossly negligent because you shouldn't be zapping people with a car battery in any case. This pertains to illness, injury, or unconsciousness. So even if the person is up and responding to you, If you have their consent, you are not liable for what you do as long as you have their consent. Anytime in Ontario specifically, you have to have the person's permission if they're conscious. If they're unconscious or they're unable to respond in any way, then it's assumed that they want help. So I've had a case where there was a person in a mall who fainted, ran over, started offering first aid to the person. They didn't respond, so I started doing what I needed to. They came to, told me to get away from them. They kept walking against my advice, fainted again, hurt themselves again, went over, helped them some more. They got up again, told me not to touch them, and that repeated for about 20 minutes. But as soon as they said they didn't want my help, I had to step away and let them move on with their lives until they fell unconscious again. So for Alberta, it's called the Emergency Medical Aid Act. Very, very similar to Ontario. Protection from liability for injuries or death resulting from acts or omissions while rendering emergency first aid. This applies to aid given voluntarily and without expectation of compensation. Again, please don't ask for cash while doing CPR. This covers, differently from Ontario, professionals as well as ordinary citizens. You're only liable for gross negligence. Protection extends to care given in the immediate scene of the accident or emergency. And if the person is conscious, you still have to ask for permission first. Even if someone's in a really bad state, if they're able to respond to you and they say, do not help me, you cannot help that person legally. You have to let them be and you go and get help. So, federally, self defense laws. This is a confusing law if you look at it just by itself. So, I've summarized it. Legally, assault anywhere in Canada is any unwanted touching. This includes blocking movement. So if we were all in a room and I stood at the doorway and didn't let anyone pass me, I would be assaulting everyone in the room, even though I'm not physically touching anyone. A defender must have reasonable belief of threat of assault, death, or grievously bodily harm. It can be mistaken, but it must be reasonable. So the example I always give is if someone's following me down an alleyway very closely and they have a hand in their pocket and I think they're about to assault me, if I turn around and hit that person to get away from them, I've had reasonable belief that there was a threat of assault. And so legally, I am probably in a good state to have assaulted that person because I believed, even though it might have been mistaken, that that person was about to assault me. So I defended myself. The individual who starts an altercation, so the first punch, and the person who escalates if someone pulls a weapon or something, is a matter in the court of law. So, who starts a fight and who makes the fight more serious are the two main things that they consider for assault. So, if you're going to defend yourself, do not be the person to throw the first punch and do not be the person to pull a weapon out. As long as you don't do those two things, you're usually in a good state to use self-defense laws to protect yourself. What is reasonable to the average person and the defender is the bar in the law. So if the average person thinks what you did was reasonable, in a court of law, you're probably protected. The assault does not need to be unlawful to trigger the defense, and you must only be acting defensively. You cannot be actively assaulting the person. So if the person is on the ground saying, don't hit me anymore, if you hit that person again, you are now assaulting that person. So now you are legally in trouble. You can only act in a way to defend yourself or to defend a third person. So all of these rules apply if you are walking down the street and you saw someone being attacked. You are allowed to defend that other person as long as what you do is reasonable and defensive. As long as you do those things, legally you can defend yourself in Canada. So weapons, which is also a federal law. A weapon is anything legally used, designed to be used, or intended to be used for injuring or killing. So anything, a chair, a knife, a baseball bat, anything can be considered a weapon if it is used in that way. If it's used for the purpose of threatening someone, you can be charged with assault with a weapon. So you don't have to be hit with the weapon in order for it to be assault with a weapon. Any firearm or anything used for binding or tying someone against their will also be considered assault with a weapon. You may use a weapon if the other person uses a weapon first, but it must match and not exceed the severity of the weapon. So if someone pulls a knife and you use a chair to defend yourself, you're probably on very good ground to say I was using self-defense. Because I've worked in a bar and I've seen this happen, anytime you're defending yourself, do your best to never use glassware on a person. You're very likely to cause severe harm to someone, if not kill them, especially if you go anywhere in the head. So do your best to use any other item other than a bottle if you have things nearby you. So this is a de-escalation chart. Ignore the later part that has lethal force. This is meant for police officers, but it's the only good example I could find to show a de-escalation chart. So we're starting with our own presence, not officers, but marshals' presence. We're going to communicate. And when that communication starts to get towards the yellow is where it's going to start to hit the limit of where marshals are. At that point, we're going and getting help from anyone else. But the whole time we are trying to cooperate with the person and we're trying to passively resist any sort of aggression they're using against us. And we're keeping awareness the whole time. But when it comes to de-escalation, what I mean is we're always trying to make the person feel calmer, to make them feel like we're on their side. We're always keeping a kind face and kind words. We're standing firm but calm. So we're not insulting someone. We're not making fun of them. We're not making faces at them. We're not doing anything that could aggravate a person. When I talk about blaming anyone else, you never want to make it a one-on-one conflict between you and the other person. So blame the festival, blame the city, blame the law, blame your boss, blame any other third person you can, so that the two of you feel as though you're on the same side opposing something else. So for example, I usually use in my security work, I gotta kick you out. Unfortunately, my boss is gonna get me in trouble if I don't do this. I don't want to do it, but it's part of my job. I have to. So can you please work with me so I don't get in trouble as well as you? Words and stance matter. So being very careful how you're standing and not in an aggressive way. So we're not stancing like we're about to fight when we're just having a conversation with someone. Being aware of others. Usually when you are dealing with a person or you're providing first aid, a crowd will form. So being aware of who's there to help, who's there to cause more trouble. When I talk about lock-ons, it's a concept I sort of made of once you get into an argument with someone and they decide they don't like you, and there's no way to convince them that they don't like you, that's a lock-on. That person is now going to be argumentative with you just because you exist. In that case, it's the best to switch out with another volunteer or marshal or someone else or to walk away from the situation because there's no way to de-escalate the situation any more than it already has been. And get back up early. The second you start to feel even slightly nervous or the situation goes on more than 3 or 4 minutes, you should be getting back up. You always get back up earlier than you think you need to. It never hurts to have another person there to help you out. So in summary, for this section, emergencies, do as you're required for your own safety first, then help others. Take every reasonable step you think is required to ensure you are protected. And as long as it's reasonable, you are protected legally by what the average person is. So it doesn't have to be that you're an expert in the medical field to do the right thing and to be legally protected. Always vocalize what you're doing and who you are. Do not escalate situations and call for assistance early. After a situation, always document what happened and why you took those actions as a way to defend yourself in case the authorities get involved. And remember throughout the whole situation to breathe and ground yourself. And that brings us into emergency first aid. So, emergency first aid, the goal to start is to keep the person alive. If the person's alive, we're keeping them breathing. If the person is breathing, we're keeping them stable. If they're stable, we're keeping them awake. If they're awake, then we're keeping them speaking to us. That's sort of the goal of where we're going with first aid. So if the person is responding to us and talking to us, we've done the majority of first aid already. If the person's breathing but not doing great, then we're going to work to try to get them to where we need. If you're doing first aid, there's very little extra harm you can do. So we're always going to care about the person rather than worry about what we're doing. So if you're not sure what to do, just staying with the person and offering them comfort, it's going to help way more than you worrying about touching the person or doing the wrong thing. In all of Canada, you are not required to provide first aid, but if you do, you must continue doing it. So if someone's bleeding on the sidewalk, you could just walk right past that person, pretend you didn't see them, go home, and you won't be in trouble. But as soon as you stop and start touching the cut or touching the person to try and render first aid, you must continue doing so until a paramedic shows up or the person is well enough to go on their own way. If the person is awake and responsive, we must get consent to help the person. If they are unresponsive or unconscious, it's assumed that they want help. So if someone is unconscious on the side of the road and you don't know what happened to them, it's assumed that that person wants medical help to get them out of that state. Anytime you do first aid, stating who you are and state everything you're doing. So every time when you're looking at a cut, when you're bandaging it, when you're looking at the person, explaining what you're doing along the way so that everyone around you understands that you're helping this person. If needed, call 911 as early as possible. 911 will talk you through whatever steps you need to do in first aid until the paramedics can arrive. If you're not sure, don't do it, call for help. Usually there's someone else who knows what they're doing more so than you will, but after this training, you'll be one of the more trained people in the situation. So first things first, walking into a scene. First thing we're going to do is look for dangers. If someone's hurt, there's a reason they're hurt, and we don't want to be one of the people to get injured by that. So we're going to look for aggressive folks. We're going to look for puddles. We're going to look for electricity, sharp items, anything that may hurt us as well. If you see those items, either clear them out of the way or go back and get help. If you don't feel safe, do not approach. You don't want to become a second victim. Once you approach the person, we're going to start our ABCDs. So first thing is airway. We're going to make sure there's nothing blocking their throat so that they can breathe. If their airway isn't blocked, we're going to make sure they're breathing. If they're breathing, we're going to make sure their circulation's okay. And if their circulation's okay, we're going to look for anything that shows us that they have a disability. So for airway, I'm going to play a short video that shows you how to check it.
The head tilt chin lift. And to do that, we're going to take one hand and place it just on top of the patient's forehead. Take our other hand and just put two fingers just underneath their mandible or their jaw.
So
We're
that we
then just going to lift
down the
gently
throat
upwards
to see if
with
there's an
this
item
other hand.
blocking the throat.
And in doing so, that opens the patient's airway, removes the tongue off the back of the soft palate, and hopefully provides us with a patent airway initially.
If there's nothing down the airway, then we're going to bring our head really down low to be even with their chest. And if their chest is rising and falling, then they're breathing. You don't really need to worry about what their breathing's doing unless it's very aggressive and moving in a way that seems very unusual. As long as it's going up and down in some sort of rhythm, we're good with their breathing. For their circulation, first we're going to look at their fingertips and see if they're discolored. If they're not discolored, then we're going to assume that their circulation is okay. For disability, we're going to look for either bracelets, necklaces, tattoos, anything that might tell us that they have some sort of disability that may be affecting them. They might be having a seizure, they might be diabetic, there might be information to help us treat them. Once all of those are done, we're going to check in with the victim if they're conscious and they've given us consent to do all those things. We're going to check in with witnesses because the victim may not remember exactly what happened or may have a memory that's not in a great state. We're going to minimize the movement of the victim and ensure a safe area around them. Safe area includes keeping the crowd back away from the person so that they aren't feeling pressured by all the people with cameras and whatnot around them. And then we're going to get back up if there isn't already someone offering to help us. The other thing when you're offering first aid is that a crowd is always going to form. I've been doing this now for 12 years and I've never had an incident where a crowd did not form, even if there was no one around me at first. Use that crowd. Pick 3 people that seem capable, who seem sober, who seem confident in what they're doing and willing to help. Point at them directly and firmly order them to do an action. So we're going to order one person to go get help or backup. We're going to order one person to keep the crowd back from us. And we're going to order one person to call 911 and get that ambulance to us if it's needed. As long as you order them very firmly and confidently, 99% of the time they've gone and done that when I've done it. So how do we check if someone's conscious? For this, I'm going to clap, so just be aware that there might be some noise that's louder than usual. So I'm going to loudly speak, "Hi there, are you okay? I'm here to help. I need to make sure you're awake." And I'm going to repeat it and I'm going to start clapping. If there's no response, we're going to tap the upper part of their thigh or their shoulder with some force and try to see if there's a response to that. If the response is them lifting their arm and saying, "Get away from me," that person's alive, they're conscious, they're responding, and they're speaking. That person is okay. If there's no response at all, we're going to do a sternum rub, which is the middle of your rib cage, taking your knuckles and just rubbing. You do that for about 10-15 seconds, and it's really irritating. If the person doesn't even lift an arm or respond in any way to that, then there's a very good chance that they're unconscious. The sternum rub isn't really necessary. It's just medically advised to really know if the person's unconscious. If there's no response, ask a bystander to go get assistance and continue with first aid with the implied consent that the person is unconscious. As soon as the person starts responding to us, we then have to get their consent again. But until they respond to us, we're going to continue assuming they want first aid. If the person is breathing and hasn't fallen, we're going to put them in a recovery position, which we will show you shortly. If the situation requires an ambulance, do not give the person food or water. Paramedics hate it when you give people food and water because that means that person's then going to puke on the paramedics. So just to help those people out, don't give them that unless they're in a very good state. So here's an example of the recovery position. We're going to start by lifting one arm right up and then bring the other arm around their cheek. And then we're going to lift the knees. This way, we don't have to lift up the person. We can just roll them onto their side. Once they're on their side, we're going to move one leg out so that they stay where they are. And this way, if the person vomits or has something in their throat, it's going to come out. The worst thing we can do is if someone throws up and they're laying on their back, they can asphyxiate on it. And that can be a very large danger to a person. So when it comes to alcohol or a drug overdose, if the person is responsive, we're going to walk up slowly, ask them how they're doing, and state that you're there, who you are, and that you're there to help the person. When we do this, we're going to keep a little bit of a distance because we don't know if the person's hostile or aggressive. We're just going to slowly start chatting to the person and see how they're doing. Keeping the person talking and their eyes open is a great way to make sure that the person isn't slipping into a worse state. As long as they're responding and their eyes are open, we know that they're doing fairly okay. Offering water and getting either staff or emergency services to come help out. In a lot of cases, someone might be relatively okay, but you can't stay with the person for the next 6 hours, which means you have to get paramedics involved and they can sit and babysit that person so that you can move on with the rest of your day. Asking them what they've used and how much may upset the person, but it's a very important question so that we know what approach we need to take to help the person. Always reminding them that we aren't police, we aren't authorities, we're just here to help the person out. Do your best to keep the person sitting up. If they can't sit up, putting them in a recovery position if they're willing to stay in it are the two best positions for that so that you can sort of keep an eye on them in an easy way. If they're non-responsive, we're going to try to get them to respond to us as best they can. We're going to call for help very early on. We're going to use Narcan, which we will speak about in a minute, and put them in a recovery position if it's possible to move them into it. So for seizures, seizures happen to 1 in 10 people. 1 in 10 people will experience at least one seizure in their lifetime. Seizures look very different depending on the person. It could be collapse and shaking like you've seen on television, or it could be someone staring into space or suddenly being confused out of nowhere. So for myself, I have absence seizures, which results in me losing consciousness for 10 seconds, but I don't fall to the ground or anything. I just sort of lose consciousness. But if I'm skating or driving or something like that, it could be very dangerous, which is why you have to take medication. But it can cause injuries, but you may not realize it's a seizure unless you're aware. So if a person is having a seizure, either sitting them if it's an absent seizure or a non-shaking seizure, or laying them down in the recovery position if they're shaking. We're going to ensure their airways stay clear, and we're going to move away anything that they might swing their limbs out and hit. If they are shaking or jerking, we're going to let them move their limbs and shake them, but we're going to protect the head. So whether that's putting a pillow under their head, putting your legs and hands under their head, whatever you need to do to make sure they aren't repeatedly hitting their heads. Even when the person has recovered somewhat, we're not going to provide food or drink because they may have a second seizure. So until they are several minutes recovered, they're up, they're okay, they're not disoriented anymore, we're not offering them food until that point. For seizures, you don't necessarily need to call 911, but in situations where you do, is if it lasts over 5 minutes, if they have more than one seizure, if it's their first time, they're diabetic, or they're pregnant, and then if they were on the ground shaking, if they've injured their head, neck, or if they've cut themselves somewhere during the seizure, we're going to call 911. So for bleeding accidents or injuries, never remove the bandaging or cloth from the wound, especially the original one. So whatever cloth you put on a cut to start with, unless it's a very small cut, you want to keep that original bandaging there because it's been fused into that cut and it's part of the seal now. For smaller cuts, ideally if it's available, which hopefully you have a first aid kit of some sort on you for this, you're going to sanitize it and put a band-aid, gauze, and wrap it tightly around and keep it in place. Put some pressure on it. If the person isn't able to keep pressure on it, you can just keep pressure on it yourself. For larger wounds, when I talk about larger wounds, one where you look at it and go, that definitely needs stitches. It can't just be a band-aid. You're going to apply as much cloth or gauze as needed to cover the wound and then wrap it so that those bandages stay in place. If blood comes through those cloth or gauze, we're going to keep adding more onto it until it doesn't do that anymore. And we're keeping pressure on it until the paramedics arrive because you should have called 911 as soon as you realized that cut was needing stitches. In cases where a larger item, such as a large piece of glass, a knife, wood, anything like that, goes into someone, do not remove it. That will only make the wounds much more severe. We're going to ensure the person isn't moving that part of their body where the item is in them. And we're going to wrap a bandage around them to stabilize the item and stop the bleeding around it. Once we've done that, we're going to apply pressure without touching the item as much as possible and hold the bandage until help arrives, preferably paramedics. So for a spine injury, if someone's fallen and they've injured their spine, approach the person as calmly as you can. Take a breath first, do your grounding, whatever you need to, and then get down to their level and in front of them if you can. Encourage them not to move and just talk to them. Make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe. If the person is responsive, asking them what happened, if anything hurts, and then especially to move their fingers and toes. So just feeling their shoes and feeling if their toes move and if their fingers move. If those two move, those are great signs that the person's okay. If they're able to move both or able to move their limbs a little bit, take a few minutes to assess if there's any other injuries, if they've cut themselves or done anything else, and see how they feel. If they feel fine and they're confident that they can get up, have them sit up, go slowly, keep close enough to them that you can catch them if they fall over again so that they don't hit their head. If they're injured to the point where they can't sit up or there's a large wound of some sort, calling 911 and then stay with the person and encourage them to stay laying down, stay where they are. If the person is non-responsive, this is one of the very few times that we aren't going to put them in the recovery position because we don't want to move their spine anymore. So we're not going to move them. We're going to check their airway. We're going to check that they're breathing okay. We're going to check their circulation, and then we're going to check for disabilities. While we're doing that, we're calling 911. And if the breathing stops, that's the one time you're going to move them so that you can do CPR. So a mental health crisis. Anytime someone's having a mental health crisis, it's slightly different, but these are general steps that I find work really well for folks. Whenever we're dealing with this, we're going to keep ourselves as safe as possible, but we're going to be as friendly as possible to the person. They've probably had a few people shout at them or something. We're going to try to be a friend. So we're going to approach the person slowly and keep 2 arms distances away. So if you put your arm out fully, you should be able to do that and then have another set of distance like that from the person. That way, if the person is aggressive, they have to come quite a distance to touch you. Once we get to that distance, we're going to state who we are, that we're there to help, and we're going to ask them how they are, who they are, if they need support, and we're going to let them just talk because likely they haven't been able to express themselves to anyone. So just letting them express their feelings and what's going on in their lives usually does a lot to get them on our side and to get them in a friendly mood. We're going to suggest the grounding techniques we've learned. So tapping our fingers, we can suggest that they name 3 red things in the area or green things or any color in the area. We're going to suggest they take some deep breaths with us. If you have food and water, that is always a great way to get someone on your side. It's hard to be upset with someone who's offering you a snack. Letting the person express themselves at a reasonable level so they're not screaming at us, they're not calling us slurs, they're not doing aggressive things. We're still trying to protect ourselves and other people around us. If you're in a space like a community center, a restaurant, where your place of work, you always want to position yourself between the person and where the exit is. And you want to be on the opposite side of that so that you can stop them. So you want to be in the doorway, the stairwell, whatever it is. You want to stand in front of that because the odds that they're going to shove past you to get further into the building is very slim. The person's more likely to turn around the opposite way and go that way. So always position yourself so that they're most likely to go towards the exit if that's where you need them to go. Remind them that you're there to do a job, your volunteer position, your own job, and ask them if they can move on. Again, blame your boss, blame the city, blame anyone else. Mention that you're just here doing a volunteer job, you're just trying to help, but you have your own stuff to do. They help out? By offering them to help us, it puts them in a position of power to offer to help us out. It's a favor for us rather than an obligation they have to do. Calling for support as early as you can if you feel unsafe. Um, again, you don't want to become a victim. You don't want to be there by yourself in a situation that you don't feel comfortable in. And we're going to do CPR. So for CPR, you want to go hard, fast, and you want to get 2 inches deep into the chest. So if you're doing CPR, you're calling 911. If CPR is required if the person is not breathing and there's no clear heartbeat. So if their fingers are starting to darken and discolor and you can't see their chest rising, they likely need CPR. We're going to position our elbows with our knees touching the side of their chest, elbows locked so our arms are completely straight with one hand over the other. When you're doing CPR, very often, you're going to crack a rib. You're going to hear cracking. Unfortunately, that's part of CPR, and you're going to have to keep going until you become exhausted or the person comes back. If the option is the person not making it or the person having a cracked rib, the cracked rib is always preferred. I've heard of situations from my friends who are paramedics where they've cracked almost every rib in someone's body, and the person lived and they were very, very thankful for that situation. Anytime you do CPR, if you do a first aid course, you have to do about 2 minutes straight of it to pass a CPR class. When you call paramedics, it takes a lot more than 2 minutes for them to show up. So make sure that you have another person set up to help take over. So make sure that they're doing it correctly before you rest. Rescue breaths, you may have heard of, they're not required all the time. It depends what first aid course you take, but CPR without it is better than nothing. So don't worry about doing the rescue breaths if you don't feel comfortable doing it. So I'm going to play a few songs that you can do CPR to.
Staying alive, staying alive. Up the gym, fit up, fire your feet up, don't fit. And the gym is another one. That's
Sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll.
Also, I noticed some people asking about mobility devices as self-defense weapons. So any item you use um, in a way to defend yourself or to assault another person would be considered a weapon. So a cane, a mobility device, anything like that. But the odds that a courthouse would find you guilty of assault with a weapon if you're defending yourself with a cane is very slim, I would imagine. Um, as long as the person assaulting you was actively attacking you. If you are someone with a disability who has a cane, your ability to defend yourself may not be as good as someone else's in terms of being able to throw a punch or a kick. So using a cane or a mobility device would be seen as a reasonable step to most people, in my own opinion. So we went over CPR. And again, CPR is if someone is not breathing and they're unconscious, then we're doing CPR. It's an absolute emergency. So if you show up at a situation and there's someone already offering first aid, then you're going to have a few priorities, and these are the orders I think are most important. So, second person that's trying to help the situation, your main priority is crowd control to keep people backed up. I've been in situations where people have literally stepped on me while I'm trying to offer first aid to someone. So, getting people to back up as much as possible to give as much space to the first aider is very important. And then asking the person what support they need, how much training they have. If you have more, then you can take over. If you show up at a situation and you're the second, the third, the fourth person, you're leaving as the second or third person only if you're told to go get supplies or backup for the first aider. You're listening to what that person is doing and what they need. You're going to offer to trade off with the person if you feel comfortable with what is going on. The person with the most knowledge takes the lead. So if there's someone with medical training who's a medical professional, we're letting that person take the lead. They call the shots. If no one else has ever done any first aid training, then you or someone else who has a little bit is going to take the lead. The third person on the scene, if crowd control is under control and doesn't need a second person, then we're going to ask if we need 911 called. If it's been called, then we're going to go outside to whatever street is closest and direct the paramedics back to where the emergency is. If you arrive and nothing else is required, getting staff, whether that's fire staff, whether that's paramedics, whoever, if they aren't already on scene, to be present and offering to trade off with either the crowd control or the first aider if they need it. So how to call 911? Where I am right now in Buddies in Bad Times, it's 12 Alexander Street, and then there's a ramp on the side by the park that you go up to get in here. So you're not just giving the address, but you're giving the name, the address, and then how to get into wherever you are. Once you've done that, once you've stated where you are so that they can get paramedics to you, you're going to state the nature of the emergency. So whether it's violence, if there's weapons, if there's an active fight going on, or if it's medical, there's someone not breathing, there's been drug use, head injuries, a seizure. If it's medical, you can always tell 911 police are not needed. There is no violence. Police may still show up if they're bored or something like that. I've had it happen where they've shown up and I've asked why they are there, and they've said it's just because they're bored and they had nothing else to do. So you can always ask for no police. It's not guaranteed that they won't show up. Let them know if there's someone waiting for them, because they will tell the paramedics to look for someone waiting for them, which makes it much easier for them to find you. And they will instruct you on how to proceed. And it reminder, like in nonviolent situations, I really, really advise to let them know that you do not need police. Police tend to escalate these situations, not help. And I've had multiple medical situations where police have shown up and they've provided no medical aid. They just waited for the paramedics to show up. So when it comes to drugs, if you see an overdose or someone who seems a bit out of it, keeping some space, walking slowly towards them, speaking loudly and offering them help, letting them know who you are. You never know what state someone is in. So when you're in these situations, you want to approach slowly and just sort of get an understanding of where they are. You want to check their consciousness. So if they tell you to go away and leave them alone, that person's breathing, that person's responding, they're okay enough. So you can keep an eye on them from a distance. If they're not responding, then we're checking their ability to breathe. We're checking if they've fallen over and injured themselves, and we're checking if they're vomiting. If they're vomiting, then we're going to try to make sure that they don't asphyxiate in their own throw up. Asking folks nearby, their friends or whoever, what they did and how much they took, if they know that, so that we can pass that information on to paramedics so that they can use the appropriate drugs to do that. If they're non-responsive, we're going to call 911, and if they're completely out of it, we can't get them to respond to us. We're going to treat it like a seizure, so we're going to make sure they're not hitting their head and they're not waving their arms anywhere where they might hit something sharp. When you're doing this, if the person starts to wake up or starts to respond, backing away from them and letting them wake up. It's the same as if you were taking a nap and you woke up and there were 3 people over top of you. It's a situation where you might end up aggressive, confused. It's not a situation that's very comfortable. So if they start to wake up, giving them a break. And if they are responsive, but they seem dazed, they've taken maybe a party drug or something like that. They're at Pride, but they seem a bit out of it. They're drunk, but they haven't been drinking alcohol. Those sort of drugs, it's best to give a non-carbureted sugary drink. So a juice box, of all things, is actually one of the best cures for that. So orange juice, pineapple juice, cranberry juice, whatever kind of juice, all of those things are very effective. So naloxone or Narcan, this is a life-saving, harmless drug that is free in most of all Canada. If you go to a drugstore and you ask for Narcan, they'll just give it to you and teach you how to use it. It's used on opiates such as codeine, fentanyl, morphine, oxycodone, heroin, all sorts. It can only be used on opiates, not for alcohol, methamphetamines, cocaine, anything like that. It's only for opiates. When you use Narcan, it's for someone who is unconscious, unresponsive, and appears to have used these drugs. So when we're looking for signs of this, we're looking for either they're not breathing or very often they have a gurgling, loud snoring sound coming from them. Their circulation will be cut off, so they'll have discolored hands. They'll have tiny pupils if you can get close enough to look at their eyes. And there may be obvious signs of opium use, which are needles, dishes, which are little metal plates or pipes. All of these are signs that they might have used this type of drug, and Narcan may be useful. And when I say Narcan is completely harmless, I've used an expired one on myself before. The worst side effect you get from it is it makes your pee smell funny. That's the worst of all of it. So if you think someone's used this, it can save their life. And the most that it's going to harm them is doing that. When you use Narcan, the person may wake up right away in a very confused or hostile state. So use it, take a couple steps back. One dose may not be enough to help someone. I've heard of cases where they've had to use 3, 4, 5 before. Most cases of Narcan come with 2. If one doesn't work, you're going to start doing CPR and emit another one after a few chest compressions. While this is happening, you should be on the phone with 911. They'll be explaining to you when to use it again if you have it. Anytime we're even considering using Narcan, we should be on the phone with 911 because paramedics are most likely needed. Because even if you do CPR and give the person Narcan and they're up and responsive, the person may overdose again at a later stage. So hopefully the paramedics can convince them to come to the hospital with them so that they can take care of them. So that's where the break was going to be, but we just had it. So we'll keep going. So again, for self-defense, we're always de-escalating. So again, I want you to keep this in your mind while we're talking about how to defend yourself. So some other advice for de-escalation is to, especially around pride, use gender neutral terms. I like using my friend. So everyone is my friend. And if they're not my friends, they're folks. No one can really be offended by calling them folks. Maintaining a friendly demeanor, kind words. So always compliment the person's shoes, compliment their socks, compliment anything about them. Keep it kind, happy, calm. Offering snacks, water, or juice if you have it. No one can be that argumentative with you when you're offering them a snack. And reminding folks that you aren't police, you aren't security, you're just there volunteering, you're helping out, you're there to make sure everyone's having a good time. If you can, working in pairs is a very good way to both protect yourself as well as sort of help keep situations under control. So getting on either side of someone, even in a gentle way, um, makes them feel slightly surrounded subconsciously, and it makes them less likely to escalate if it is a situation where things might escalate because they feel surrounded. Even in situations where things might not be escalated yet, it's a good idea to have someone on the left and the right of the person just so that you can keep some distance and keep some control of the situation. Identifying yourself early on as a marshal, a volunteer, someone who's just there and cares, and keeping your distance are great ways to keep yourself protected. That way, everyone in the area knows that you're just helping out, you're not trying to start a fight or anything, and you have enough distance to keep yourself protected. If the person is on the ground, again, keeping that 2 arms length, but getting down on the ground if you're able to, crouching down to their level so that you can talk to them, makes them feel a lot more comfortable. And then awareness. So when we're defending ourselves, we're always keeping aware of our situations. We're keeping aware of what's behind us because we don't want to be backed into a corner. But we're never going to be the one that makes a fist or aggressive stance first. If it is escalating, we're going to make sure to maintain that distance we talked about. And we're going to make sure that there's a distance behind us as well, or an exit behind us, so that if we need to, we can escape the situation. Remembering to keep our box breathing happening, getting back up when we need it, and reminding yourself that you have every right to defend yourself, to defend others in your community if it comes to that, and that you can always make that escape because you were prepared and you have it ready to go if you feel unsafe. Once you're ready, take a stance, which we're about to teach you. Look prepared, do your best not to look scared. Most folks will back down pretty quickly once you make a stance. Um, most folks are intimidating people, but they don't actually want conflict. So very often, once you start making a stance and looking prepared, that person's going to back down because they don't actually want to escalate it that far. Think about whatever personally puts you in a strong mental state. So your friends, your family, your community. For me, very often when I'm working security, being in a queer bar, I think about the history of queer protests, queer resistance, and that's something that sort of internalizes strength for me as a way of if these people were able to stand up and defend themselves, I can as well. Um, and if you feel unsafe, backing away and keeping an eye on the person from a distance is always a great strategy. That way you can go get help as soon as you're able to, and you know where the person is to go get help and point out that person. So now stance. So when we're doing a stance, which I'll show you in a second, we're going to think of being on a skateboard or surfboard. So we'll stop sharing. I'll show you how to do that. So when we're doing a stance, if we're starting like this, we're going to bring one foot back. So I'm left-handed. I'm going to bring my left one back. I'm going to bend my knees so that they're distance apart. So if I lean forward, I can catch myself. If I lean back, I can still catch myself. I can move any direction. When we're doing this, we're going to keep our knees bent as much as possible. So our foot should always be aimed at the center of the person we're trying to defend from. And we're going to keep our hands up, sort of like we're surrendering. Our hands are up, palms are up. We're still talking to the person. We're still keeping that 2 arms length distance. So if we need to back up, we're keeping an eye on what's behind us and backing up so that we keep that distance from that person. And we're looking out for other dangers. So does the person have friends with them? Is there someone else who's aggressive? Is there glass around us? Where are the exits? Anything like that. We're going to firmly but calmly state that we're not here to fight. We're going to ask the person to back up, to step away from us, that we don't want conflict. And we're going to ask bystanders to go get backup, to go get staff, to go get paramedics, to go get anyone who can help us. In 90% of situations where it's got into this, once you start doing that, the person's going to back down. And if you do get into a physical altercation with someone, fighting is very tiring. So it usually only lasts a few swings if it does come to that. But for the most part, people don't just punch at each other. It's very rare for it to happen. But if you do get in that situation, just know that it's not going to last forever. So for striking, we're going to use the palm of our hand because that hurts just as much as making a fist. If the person's too close to use the palm of our hand, we're going to use our elbows. When you make a fist, you're much more likely to break a knuckle in your fist, which hurts quite a bit. If you do it, you're going to tuck your thumb under your knuckles, not in your knuckles, which I'll show you in a moment. Um, when we are throwing a punch or a palm strike, we're going to aim for weak points. So nose, groin, eyes, throat. If you can't get any of those, going for the ear is very effective, or the kidney or the knees. Any joint in a body is a weak spot. So after each set of strikes, we're backing up and reassessing. So again, we're going back to the start of the de-escalation process and seeing if the person wants to continue to escalate because we don't want to. If the person stops, if they fall to the ground, then we restart the whole process. We try to escape or get away. So when I talk about a palm strike, we're looking at this part of the palm. So we're going up like this. So we're like this, and we can go up. So we're hitting with this part of the palm. If you're making a fist, do not make a fist like this. That's how you break the idea, the thumb. So we're doing it like this or like this. So for grabs, if someone grabs you, the most important part of the grab is the thumb and the wrist for control and for force. If we're grabbed, we're trying to escape. We're not trying to win the fight. We're just trying to get out of that grab. So initial distractions, stomping on the foot, hitting the person in the stomach, hitting them in the face, wherever you can aid with your escape to get away from the person. So for one hand, for the control, we're going to use the weakest part of the body to get away. So we'll do an example of that. So if someone grabs me, we're looking for where their thumb is, and we're pulling away that way. So I'm going to stance and pull away. So if we do that closer, we're looking for where the thumb is. So I'm going to stance and brace and pull away. Because if I pull this way, I can't get away. But if I pull this way, the thumb can't hold your whole arm in place. So now if you do 2 arms, this no longer works. I can't pull away any direction. So what I'm going to do is take this hand that's being grabbed and make a fist, bring this one over and pull up and away. That gives us leverage. So if I go like this, I can't get away. But if I bring my other arm over top between the two and up, then I can get away. So these are images that show you how to do it. So now if someone grabs my shirt, I'm going to place a hand on their wrist to control where it is and twist it out away from the clothes. And if someone grabs my throat, I'm going to bring my shoulders up, tuck my chin in, and turn away. So now, if I can't escape because someone's grabbed my shirt, if I try to pull away, I can't. So I'm going to grab the wrist. I'm going to turn it away so that the thumb is out, away, and then I can escape. So I'm going to stance so that I can bounce around. I'm going to control the situation so the person's not pulling me around. And then I'm going to twist away. And now I can escape. And then for the throat, if someone's grabbing me by the throat, so you can practice it either this way or this way. Lift your shoulders, twist away. We're twisting away the way of the thumb. So we're twisting away. And again, these are techniques that use joints and control points. So these are, you can be someone who's very small. When I first started doing these sort of positions, I weighed 120 pounds. I was very small compared to most people I was dealing with. These use control points so that you don't need power in order to get away from them. You just use the joints to get away. So there's an example of it. So you see you bunch up your shoulders as high as possible to make your neck as small as possible, and then you twist away. Don't put your arms straight up like that. That's just for the demonstration. So now one that I get asked about a lot is if someone bear hugs you from behind. In that situation, you can't pull away. You can't escape very easily. So what we're going to do is essentially a jumping jack. But we're going to do it very low so that we can step away from the person. If we're not able to do that to get away, we're going to use any means possible to stop to get away from the person. That means stomping on their leg, grabbing their groin, biting them, whatever you need to do in order to escape from that person. So if we're going to do that as an example, so if someone grabs me like this, I can't go anywhere. I can't escape. I can't hit the person. So what I'm going to do is stomp on the person's foot and then raise and step out. So again, persons like this, my elbows, I can't do anything. I'm gonna and then step away as quickly as possible. Again, these are just for in situations where someone's assaulted you and you need to defend yourself. And then, so if you get put in a headlock, you're gonna tuck your chin into the elbow of the attacker as much as possible. You're gonna make your chin and your nose as tight into your neck as possible. And while maintaining control, you're going to pull their forearm away from you to make as much space so that you can get your head out of that. If you're able to, getting your leg behind the other person is always a great way to get control because then you can push them away. And by pushing them away, that gives you lots of time to escape. So now, if I'm putting a headlock, you want to do it. So if I have them in a headlock like this, then they're going to tuck their nose into my elbow. They're gonna pull my arm down and twist away. From here, I can't tighten my arm enough in order to keep them where they are. And from here, they can now push me away and escape. So the main point is you're going to put your nose and chin as tightly into the elbow here so that you can make as much space as possible in order to escape under the armpit. So again, there's graphic. So now floor defense. So if you do get knocked to the ground, it's a very bad position to be in, but we'll show you how to protect yourself when doing it. So if you find yourself getting knocked to the ground, the best thing to do is to spread your arms wide like wings, tuck your chin in, and let your body relax as much as possible and exhaling. So the reason we exhale is so that we don't get winded when we hit the ground. There's no wind to knock out of us because it's already out. This will stop you from hitting your head and from getting winded. So we're protecting the head first. The rest of the body can take a bit of a fall. Once we're on the ground, we're assuming the attacker's still coming at us. So we're keeping our knees up and we're keeping one hand up so that we can defend our face. And we're using the other hand to get some control on the ground for stability. With the opposite leg to the arm controlling the ground, we're going to kick to get away from the person. So if I'm going to fall, I'm going to fall and catch myself as much as possible on the ground. So I'm keeping my arms out, chin in, out. Once I'm on the ground, knees are up, one arm is down, one hand is up. So I look like this. That way my head is fine. So again, this is what I was saying about it being the 1% of times is it's an absolute last resort. So this is someone's already attacked you, they've already injured you, they've already hurt someone else in the situation, and you have no choice but to defend yourself before more harm comes to you. So for myself, I've almost never used these. Most of the time, offering someone a snack, letting the person talk and explain themselves, and just giving them some time to process what's going on is enough to help someone. So we're always trying to help someone. We're always trying to get them on our side to be friends with them. And then if we have no other option other than to defend ourselves before we get injured, because we never want to become an other victim to a situation. Um, I myself, several people I know and love have been assaulted in very badly in situations where they've ended up in hospital. So these are techniques you can use in those absolute worst case scenarios to get away from someone who's trying to harm you and doesn't want to have that conversation, doesn't want to be your friend, doesn't want to protect the community. And that's everything I have. So now it's on to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Aidan and Katie, for all of that really helpful material. I did note a question in the chat that I don't think we had time to get to on the break. Someone was hoping that you could talk a little bit about humane de-escalation for animals in particular.
Okay. So for animals, it can be a little difficult because you can't really talk to them, but very similar things of keeping your distance, trying to talk calmly to them because even though it's an animal, when they hear calm sound, it can help. If you do have snacks or water, offering it can help. But keeping a distance and just sort of keeping an eye while you back out of the space. Um, and again, asking for help. If the owner's around or anywhere asking for help, someone else can come and render aid while you're trying to deal with the situation. I also saw one that is any resources for folks with disabilities for adapting these techniques. A lot of these techniques, like for myself, I have a knee that can go out quite often. It can be difficult to find techniques. My advice is always to so try and practice these at home and figure out what way of doing these work best for you, because these are just the very basics for self-defense, so you can always modify them slightly. So if you can't take a stance in the way I showed you, then taking whatever stance makes you feel the most stable when you're trying to stand against someone is what's going to work best for you. These are all practices that don't have to be perfect. They don't need to be exact. They're just what works for you.
Um, we had a question in the chat about, oh, I've lost it. As a marshal, would it be our job to ask disruptive people to leave, or is this a job for security?
So it depends what you mean by disruptive. But so if someone's being disruptive, my stance is always to use that third party example of always, it's not you and that person have an issue, but you and the community are being disrupted by this person. So let's say someone's blasting music while you're trying to have a festival or a speaking event or something like that. Just talking to the person and saying, hey, we're trying to do something here. Do you mind lowering it? Do you mind moving somewhere else? We don't want to be a problem. We don't want conflict. We're just trying to do our thing. You're trying to do your thing. Let's just do them in separate spaces. If someone's being disruptive in different ways, if they're protesting or something like that, talking to the person and saying, I understand you have your point, we have our point. If you don't mind letting us do our part, we'll let you do your part somewhere else. That sort of thing. If that doesn't work and the person starts to escalate, then that's a situation where you might want to go get assistance and someone like a security guard. If not to handle the situation, then to just be backup while you try to have a calm conversation with the person and try to encourage them to see your side of things as well. I always find marshals are first point of contact because we're the least likely to escalate things.
I will say thank you so much, Aidan, for joining us. This has been so illuminating and deep and useful. Thank you also to Katie, who you've seen in the self-defense demonstrations and who's been very sweetly answering questions and connecting with folks in the chat. And thank you everyone for attending. It means so much.
I just wanted to say thank you to Affirming Connections for setting all this up. And thank you to everyone who showed up and listened to all this. Um, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that you share this information with the rest of your communities as well.